Hello, everyone. Happy day 3 of U.S. Media Literacy Week. I'm Culla Lipkin, the Executive Director of NAMLE, and I am so excited for our Media Literacy Week book talks. I am here with Devorah Heitner, who just wrote and published this amazing book called Growing Up in Public. I appreciate this book so much, especially because it comes at a time when there's a lot of cultural conversation about social media and teens that take kind of a protectionist slant. And I love the way that you reframe the conversation from we want to teach kids to do the right thing to we want to teach kids to do the right thing, not catch them doing the wrong thing. So thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to talk to you about this book. Why don't we start with you introducing yourself and telling us why this book, why right now?
Yeah, so I'm Devorah Heitner, and I wrote this book because so many people were asking me these tough questions about reputation, but ignoring, I think, the role that parents and educators play in surveillance and making, potential reputation pitfalls and harms more grave and more problematic for kids than I think they need to be. And because we don't have things like the right to be forgotten here in the US, like people in the UK have and other things. And I had written Screenwise, and I was traveling all over and speaking in schools and corporations, and people kept asking, okay, well, I understand screen time can be more nuanced than I thought, and it's not just about the minutes and quality over quantity, but how do I understand the fact that my middle schooler could just blow up their life going viral for the wrong reason? And that's why I started diving into what turned into 5 years of interviewing teens, tweens, families, educators, clinicians for this book.
Oh, that's amazing. 5 years. And you can tell, it's so well researched, well done. It just feels like you are kind of guiding the ship. I just feel so she knows what she's talking about. This is amazing. She's talking to so many people, and your book touches on so many different things, but I noticed that one theme, which is kind of clear in any time I've heard you talk, is the fact that parents need to be engaged and communicative with their kids rather than relying on tools that monitor or might even lessen kids' independence. And I really appreciate that framing that you use, mentor over monitor. That is really well said. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of that crucial communication skills piece that you think parents need to kind of guide them through and guide their families through the digital age.
Absolutely. Right now we're really thumbing out our lives in front of our kids, and they're not observing our communication in the same way. They're not hearing us. Our kids don't hear us on the phone the way we heard our parents. And so we need to translate some of the empathy and skill set, human skill set, in how we're making decisions about how to share news, how to resolve conflict is a big one. Kids get to a conflictual space pretty fast on texting, and they don't know how to resolve. So there's just a lot that we need to teach our kids. And I think there's also so much surveillance tech out there, and so much of it is being pushed to parents, even by schools, which we can get to. And that it's really difficult to go against that grain and push back and say, wait a minute, I'm not sure I want to do that. I want to be in conversation with my kid. I want to be a resource to my kid. I want to be someone they can turn to, because the best insurance really to keep kids safe is the relationships they have with adults and people they can lean on and talk to if they are struggling with their mental health, or if they are being bullied, or if they have a peer who is struggling, or if they're getting creepy, direct messages, or all kinds of things. We don't want them to just be hiding. And so much of the surveillance tech discourages that relationship, encourages kids to hide, and at the least harmful, discourages them from becoming as independent as they need to be successful in these digital communities.
I love what you just said about how, we heard our parents on the phone, right? We heard that, and now digital tools are so individualized, and we don't get that. I think that's a really, really good point. One of the things that I love that you do in this book, which is not surprising because I run a media literacy organization, is you model inquiry really, really well here, because you're constantly asking questions and reflecting on situations and behaviors. And that is something that's core to media literacy education. So throughout the book, as you're talking through scenarios, you're asking these reflective questions. And it feels like such a great way to mentor the parents that are reading this book. So I'm wondering, it seemed very deliberate, and I'm wondering why you felt that format was important.
Well, I mean, I was a college professor and I do a lot of speaking and workshops. So I think it's just, that's the educator in me trying to be in the conversation. And even, I was with a group of parents in Connecticut last night and in New York the night before. And I always have to say, it's not me. I'm not here to tell you what to do. You know what I mean? Like, if your family loves all being in a circle on Life 360 and it's really working for you, like, I have big questions about that. But I'm also not here to tell people what to do. I'm here to help people get to the place they need to get to with their own kids, but hopefully to be reflective about the process and not just, go to that one school meeting where they say you need to be, checking your kids' grades on Canvas or whatever surveillance tech every 3 seconds and just like blindly follow. Like, maybe that's what you need to do, but like, I just want you to like think about it first. Yeah. And also notice, hey, if it's causing tremendous conflict and undermining, your relationship with your kid, maybe you can pull back or make a change. And so I'm trying to just empower people, but also, I mean, this isn't, I don't believe in some sense in parenting advice. And so in some sense, I'm frustrated that this is in the parenting section in the bookstore, because I think these questions about kids' identities and what it means to grow up in public is a bigger conversation, and not one that only people who are currently raising kids want to be in, but also because I feel like being in the parenting section implies that I'm like, I have a how-to manual.
That is a really interesting point. And so where would you want to see it?
I mean, just like, I'm honestly like out with the new nonfiction right now, right? Like the front of the store, of course. But I just think, or, on the side of the bus, please. But really, it's so, I do think there's more of a general question. I mean, I have friends who don't have kids or whose kids are grown, who are very interested in these things. And when I also think anyone who's designing tech should be looking, of course, not just at like my book, but also like so many books right now. I mean, Kashmir Hill's new book, Your Face Belongs to Us, is obviously, kind of a terrifying book, but I think people who are designing tech need to look at these things and think about, what is the impact on the user? What is the impact on all these people who are using what we create? So some of my most interesting conversations have been in Silicon Valley. That's where I got to launch the book, and I spoke in Mountain View, the day it came out. And a lot of the parents who attended, at Mountain View Los Altos High School also work for, these big companies like Meta and some of the other ones, and Google, right? And they're right there. And I think those questions are very lively and animating for people. And the sort of old horse of like, oh, none of these people let their kids use tech is kind of BS. Like, that's not the case. Well, I know that article has had so much outside. There's that one article about how, every single, exec in technology is sending their kids to Waldorf school to play with wooden blocks. And A, that's a really dated article. And B, most people can't afford that if they're trying to live in the Bay Area, like they're going to public school. And C, that's just not true. Like, people want to be able to text their kids on the way home. It's just not true that people are abstaining from the products they use.
That's a really good point. No, that article had a lot of life to it. That has just been recycled over and over again. So you mentioned the surveillance kind of topic. That is, a big part of the book, which really resonated with me, because I resisted checking those apps when my kids were school age, and they really didn't have it until they were middle school, high school. And I just remember feeling like it was a level of involvement that I was not interested in, and it didn't feel like incredibly healthy to know everything my child was doing in every class at every point. And it felt like unnatural to know that much.
It's also a mental load issue for parents, where I'm like, I maybe if you have a third or fourth parent, they can take that on, but I don't know, like, I've got a job.
Yeah. And I was like, I already went to middle school. I went to middle school. I don't need to do it again. So what I appreciated was you really provided an overview of the downsides of this surveillance kind of culture in school, that I think is a real interesting kind of clear evidence that that social media being the sole cause of like mental health issues or stress for teens. It's more complicated than that, right? And I just heard a story about this Meta lawsuit that came out where the states are suing Meta for the harm their product is doing to young people. And I heard a scholar talk about how, it's clear that there is no other reason why kids would be depressed or stressed right now than social media. And it seems that that's just a really simplified way, because I think about how you broke down the surveillance, and that seems incredibly stressful. And so can we talk a little bit more about like how education has changed at the same time social media has become part of kids' lives, and how the kids that we know are being impacted by that surveillance?
Absolutely. I mean, so it starts in grade school with these behavior monitoring apps like Class Dojo, which are very profound, sets of communication. And I think, during remote school, a lot of parents heard teachers managing behavior, it was like being a fly on the wall in a room you were never supposed to be in, when you could hear the teacher like potentially like admonishing your child. And I wrote about it then for the Washington Post. And Class Dojo does that even when your kid is in the school building. Did your kid get up without asking permission? Did they, speak without raising their hand? And, do you need to know that is a real question. And I spoke to experts like Leslie Caprow at the Bank Street School at Columbia about, how can we think differently about intrinsic versus extrinsic ways of getting kids, behavior to be in a community that works. And there's so much about that. So how can we think about why we don't want to get all this information? And then that translates, especially in middle school and high school, to, the grading portals and kids getting texts from their parents about getting a 0 during the school day that their parents saw their grade before they did. Like, again, we need to like divorce ourselves from that mental load and like focus on it. Keep your eye on your own paper and your own work and your own, running your household. Like, you don't need to be like following your kid's day that closely, but the schools encourage it. And I think it's kind of a bastardization of the research that says parental involvement is good. Like, yes, parental involvement is good. Yes, it's good. For example, like, should I know if my kid is taking a foreign language in high school, or should I, be encouraging him to think about like what electives to take and have conversations with me about extracurriculars? Of course I should, right? It's definitely better to do that than to have no idea what's going on. But I think the idea that more and more is better. It's like, let's focus on the barriers of access to like the most basic levels of parental involvement, and not focus on having a certain strand of parents who are so focused on very specific outcomes, which maybe are a dated thing to focus on because we know that college admissions has changed as well, but people get so focused on this. And then kids are experiencing things like even Naviance, the college admission software, as being just an extension of the social pressures of something like Instagram, because it's a place where they're compared and shared. And what I talk about in the book is viewing yourself from the outside in, right? Like, not learning to see yourself as your own human being, but looking at your dot on a graph or looking at your posts on a grid on Instagram and like comparing to others. And Naviance is really a lot like some of the things we don't like about social media. So I think when parents say they are worried about the mental health impacts of social media, I think they're not necessarily even looking at, Power School and some of these other things.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. And I think you did such a good job in like kind of weaving the scenario of the kid who is in school, who gets the text from the mom who's like, you missed this, assignment, and those things are not up to date, and just the mental load of that they're in school trying to learn, and yet all of these external factors are impacting their present moment. And then the way that you talk about what impact that has on kids' independence as they get older and when they're in college, and what does it mean to have independence, I think is really just, you weave it so well throughout. I also have to comment that I love how many like personal stories you shared about your time growing up, and like the little tidbits about you were so great, because
my father read the book and it was just, and he was like, wait, you were sneaking off to Rocky Horror Picture Show? And I'm like, Dad, I'm 48. Like, now, from when I was 14, like all the dirt. So funny.
Yeah. No, but it is so interesting. Your point about that we've taken parental involvement to that level, I think is such a really good point, because what does that even mean? And when just because we have the tools, should we be using them? So speaking about parents, another topic that you dive into that I really appreciated and that we've heard a lot about is this concept of sharenting, right? So, and kind of from my point of view, it's some hypocrisy about what we expect of kids about their sharing, and that we don't, as parents, check our own behaviors. And I thought you did just a really good job in kind of navigating that, not to like shame parents, but just to like reflect on, that experience of being a teen and realizing, wow, my family has been sharing about me my whole life. And the idea of these moments of mentoring about consent and sharing. So I'd love to talk about that. So like,
yeah, I mean, when we ask our kids consent before we share them, we're modeling a practice we want them to take with us, with others, with peers. And we're very importantly giving them permission to say no, which is great for them to practice, because they may need to set that boundary with a peer in all kinds of ways around digital sharing. And it also may drive them to ask us questions about who we're sharing with, which is a great opportunity for us to talk about social networks and our experience. So there's just a lot of great stuff there. And I think when we do share news about our kids with permission, and we let our followers or connections know, hey, this was shared with permission, we're modeling a respectful relationship with our adolescents that they might be able to learn from. And that's like a very subtle way to like mentor your friends. You don't have to like call them up and be like, don't share about your kids without permission. But if you only share when you have permission and you say, I'm sharing with permission, then that's really great. And especially around things like college admissions, to just come back to that, to let our kids lead the way, because one of the things I learned from kids is that they are actually negotiating this with their friends in a very direct and thoughtful and empathetic way. If they've applied to the same schools, that they'll share with each other one-to-one before they share publicly. And they don't want their parents necessarily sharing publicly. Another piece that I learned about even since the conversations for the book was the way that snap maps and the surveillance of snap maps and knowing where your friends are in the Snapchat map can illustrate where people are visiting colleges. And so that's happening this fall. And I was just speaking with a group of parents in suburban New York, and they were like, yeah, my kid is tracking where all their friends are visiting because they can see them on the snap maps. So think about the level of privacy our kids have. It's so minimized by these things sometimes that they're opting into, but it doesn't really feel like a choice.
So privacy is another thing I wanted to talk to you about, because your framing of small versus big privacy, I would love to talk about that, because I thought that was, there's some things I'm going to use now from this book, just so you know.
Well, I'm glad, because as a media literacy expert, I would worry that, that in some ways I simplified a lot by going to small versus big, because it's in some ways a book that I really want a general reader and not someone who feels like I need to really get information literacy to, you know what I'm saying? So I'm
Yes.
trying to kind of simplify some big ideas here, but yeah, I mean, the contextual collapse that Dana Boyd talks about and other people talk about with social media, where you like forget, your friend makes a comment when you say you have a new job, like, oh, I'm so glad you got out of that, viper's nest of your old job. And they're not thinking about the fact that like 5 of your friends and colleagues from your old job are like on your social account, of course, right? Yeah. And so like the time to say that is over the margarita in person, not on social, but we forget, and our contexts have collapsed, and that's small privacy. And that's where kids forget that, Uncle Ned can see what they posted. And then there's big privacy, which is, the stuff Kashmir Hill's writing about, the facial recognition. There's, the fact that TikTok knows exactly what color cats you like and what music you like with your cats. There's all this sort of algorithmic creepiness going on. And kids are very mixed on big privacy, because some of them find it very convenient that TikTok knows what color cats you like. And I find it very creepy.
I do find that I used to joke that my kids wanted privacy from me, but they didn't care what Mark Zuckerberg knew about them.
Exactly. No,
I
think that's accurate. And I think, but kids do think a little bit about different friend groups and other things. And that's why they have these spam accounts, for example, on some of their social, where they'll have a main account that's more public and then a smaller private account. And a lot of parents worry that's sort of, devious, but it's actually most likely just a smart way to deal with privacy.
I do appreciate you don't shy away from concerns, right? You don't shy away from the risks that exist, but there's a general theme about trust and how do we like the ultimate goal is to have trust with your child, right? As they get older. And my kids are 21 and 19. And I think in some ways, as they get older, that's the only thing you have, right? You don't see them a lot. You don't experience a lot of their day to day, but do they trust me? Do they know that they can call me? And building that foundation from a very young age is so important. So thinking about trust, what would you tell a group of parents that are struggling with that and the importance of trust and elements like communication and consent?
I think you cannot force a trusting relationship. You have to kind of let it happen. And in some ways, it's true that some kids will sort of lie or dissemble or do things, but we don't want to be like, if our response to that, for example, is to go even more invasive, then they can go even into more hiding. And so we just have to really be there for them in an empathetic way, including letting them turn to us, about issues that have come up, making sure we haven't scared them so much about something like sexting that they can't, turn to us, for example, if they're in a jam or someone has a compromising image of them, just as like one example of things that can come up. And then make sure that we are worthy of their trust. Like if we're kind of, not taking them seriously or, undermining them, then, maybe they should be trusting someone else. And even for parents who are deeply trustworthy, I also want to put this out there. There may be a time where just developmentally your kid really does turn away from you and maybe they need to talk to a therapist or another adult for whatever reason. And that doesn't mean you have failed. But I think a lot of parents use that, in that time, feel like they should go into the deep dive of surveillance. And unless it's really a life or death issue, I wouldn't suggest it. I mean, I think I just said I wasn't going to give advice, but I think that I'll say instead of I wouldn't suggest it, I would just say there may be more harm and risk than upside if you go into surveillance mode when it's just because you haven't talked to your kid in a while or you don't know who they're sitting with at lunch anymore and they used to tell you everything like that. That may kind of drive them even further away because they're going with their developmental need for privacy at this age. Now, if you strongly suspect your kid is in a crisis and you have no other available way to find out what's going on and they're stonewalling you, then that would be a reason to maybe, do a deeper dive into, what you can find. Like if you need to get your kid, and I hope this doesn't happen to anyone listening, but you may have a friend in this situation where you need to get your kid a bed in an inpatient setting immediately. And they're saying, I'm fine, but they've been posting about self-harm or suicidal thoughts. That's a different situation. But I think so many of us, including myself, have experienced this, like, oh, my adolescent doesn't want to talk to me the way they used to, or just isn't a high discloser. And there's not a reason to be like going through hundreds of their texts and like doing that kind of deep dive, because it's only going to send them scurrying for a VPN or just like a different way to communicate.
It is interesting though, to think about, when I'm just going to use the ages like 13 to 15, I separated from my parents and I stopped, talking with them all the time. And I prioritized my friendships and wanted to get out of the house and be with my friends and have crushes on boys and be in my like social circle. And that was just what felt like natural. And I did definitely feel like I had a freedom to do that. And because today at that age, that is when personal devices and, social media become such a big part of our kids' lives that it feels sometimes that parents turn as if it's a social media issue, as it's like, no, they're supposed to not be telling you as much as they used to. They're supposed to be focused on their social circles. And parents tend to look at the social media behavior as the reason for all of that.
Yeah. I mean, I do think we want to nudge kids to do some of that in-person socializing with their friends. And I think the pandemic, more than even social media, has interrupted that. And the combination has been, and I definitely, including my own kid, again, like sometimes feel like, oh, we're too cozy at home, like get out the door, so I'm actually more interested in seeing parents kind of nudge their kids to that external independence and going to see friends. Like if your kid is only gaming at home with friends or on TikTok, with their friends, but they're home and their friends are home, it's like, go make those TikTok dances in person, like, but get out of the house or have the friends over or do something. Like, I do think our kids need this sort of some practice on the face-to-face, and the social media can be a bridge and the gaming can be a bridge. But when it's not enough of a bridge, sometimes I think that adults can be should maybe nudge and push, because we don't want our kids to get so comfortable on the couch.
Yeah, it's a good point. So one thing, we don't have that much time left, but one thing I wanted to ask was your thoughts on just this growing movement toward like legislative efforts around social media bans. And we mentioned before the latest lawsuit against Meta from like 40 states, or right, is like a lot of states. I haven't read it yet, but and that kind of trend to shutting it down. What are your thoughts? Like, what have you learned
I think
over years?
I understand why users are frustrated, why caregivers are frustrated, educators are frustrated. If you have like an impersonation account that's causing someone tremendous heartbreak and pain, and maybe even putting them into physical danger, and you can't get someone to get back to you at the app, and so I think the apps, especially when they let go content moderators or people who are responding to bullying complaints, when they're not responsive, then they're not really living up to their promise to users and acknowledging the tremendous role that they have in users' lives. And so I guess I would say I understand why states are getting to the point of lawsuits. I think we're in a really complicated moment politically, though, because when people say, oh, we're coming together across the aisle to protect kids, one of the big questions I have is, yes, but different people with different beliefs have really different ideas of what we're protecting kids from. And I want to make sure, coming where I'm coming from, that we're not protecting kids from access to information about their physical and mental health, that we're not protecting them from information about sexuality. Again, I don't mean that kids should be able to access pornography, but I don't want to be in a situation where kids can't access any health-related information or sexuality or gender-related information. So my worry is that once people sort of get to the other side of this hill, and they're like, great, we're all here to protect kids, that we're going to find out that we have very different ideas about what we're protecting kids from. And that's going to be a big problem to solve. Do I think the social media companies need to listen more to their users, especially parents and educators and kids themselves, about the challenges? Absolutely. Absolutely. And they need to look at their own research. I mean, Frances Haugen, came forward in 2021 and with their own internal research. Should they be thinking about toxic algorithms that send someone who's thought about self-harm or suicide more information about that? Absolutely, right? Or, drugs and alcohol, eating disorders. Like, we know that the algorithms can be toxic, and they absolutely need to be looking at that and not just at their bottom line. Like, they are profitable enough.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like, they need to, really think about their responsibility and their responsibilities vis-a-vis, sharing misinformation. And I know that they're not newspapers, right? And they're not editorial product, but it's a really tricky line, especially when people share misinformation that's harmful and can absolutely, create dangerous situations. So I'm not surprised people are suing. I certainly think it's maybe a more productive approach than putting it all on parents, which some of these parent state laws are trying to do. And I wrote in my own Substack this year about why I think the Utah law is dangerous. And I feel that way about some of the other laws. That one's one of the more dangerous ones because of the real overreach. I also think it's just pragmatically kind of impossible because not all kids have parents. So like, what about those kids?
Yeah.
There's so many reasons why I think that law is problematic, but certainly just to say one thing is, if you can drive when you're 16, then you probably don't need to be 18 to use Instagram. Like, I do think that as yes, social media can be tricky, can have risks. Driving around a big machine that can kill you or another person is probably a bigger risk than getting on TikTok. So I just think we have to kind of have some perspective, and laws like that to me don't seem sensible and don't seem like a solution. I think we need to look hard at the laws about sexting. I just talked to someone yesterday at an event who was talking about someone who was criminalized and went to jail because of an age difference in a sexting situation. I didn't get the full story, but again, like any consensual sexting that's sending children who share images with other children, like a 15-year-old sharing an image with another 15-year-old, where someone ends up incarcerated, like, and it, where it was consensual. I just feel like this is a huge problem in our legal system.
And I have to say, so we didn't even get to the sexting conversation in this, which I think is another super important conversation that you're having, because it's another one that doesn't have enough nuanced discussion out there in culture. So, and I feel like we need to have a whole nother, like I could talk to you for hours about the social media bans and what ultimately will get the companies to do what we know that needs to do, and whether this legislative, like my biggest thing is I don't think these are the answers to those solutions. So, oh gosh,
I'm not sure they are either. I'm just saying,
yeah.
I really do understand and empathize with why people are getting up to here with it.
Yeah. And I love your, like, I love the way you presented that, just like to be empathetic, that people really feel like something needs to be done. So the next thing everyone needs to do is read the book. Those of you who attended will have an opportunity to win this on raffle. And, just so excited for this being out there in the world, Devorah, and anything we can do to continue to spread the word, let us know.
I'm going to just share a link to jump on my mailing list. If people want, I'll put it
excellent.
in the
Awesome.
And then I'm also going to say that if you don't get the book here, you can also just get it anywhere, any independent bookstore or all the online places have it. And I have free discussion guides on my website at devorahheitner.com as well. And so if you want to have a discussion in your community about the book, I have an educator discussion guide and a parent discussion guide, but you can use either the questions from either one, depending on like if you're more on the clinical side or more on the like community side. And I would love to hear from people how it's going. And I'll just also put my Instagram handle. I'm Devorah Heitner, PhD on Instagram.
Great, that's awesome.
I really love to hear from people who are reading the book, who are having conversations. Someone just told me today her 11-year-old is reading it. It is not predominantly or primarily written for kids, but I'm really excited to hear that 11-year-olds are reading it.
That's fantastic.
Well, if you want to have a book club in your family and read it with your teenager, go for it.
Oh, that's a great idea. Well, congratulations. It's a wonderful book, and it brings up such important, relevant topics. So thank you for writing it. And thank you for being here, and good luck with what comes next. And I'm sure I'll be in touch soon.
Thank you. Have an amazing day, everyone. Keep on fighting the good fight for media literacy. It's so important. You are all my people. So I really, really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you.